The prehistoric park was in its final days of production. It had been open to many visitors already, but was under a constant state of construction and adding in more creatures. The latest was the Mapusaurus. The dinosaur would have the final zone assigned to it, though there was one architect who realized there could be one more zone added if the holding pen was turned into a proper living area for a specific dinosaur. But that would be decided upon at the very end, and for now, this new carnivore was treated as royalty due to the fact that it was one of the last to be added, possibly the last carnivore to the park. The Mapusaurus was once again a dinosaur that was not inherently introduced and created in the original park, but instead only recently been manufactured with the custom DNA splicing that was gaining traction amongst the scientists. This dinosaur was a beautiful specimen, and iconic for the red spikes along its spine. Its skull was very narrow and pointy, making the overall impression with its slender physique that it could chase prey for a long time and depended on speed more than strength. It was, however, very large, even a bit comparable to that of a Giganotosaurus. Yet some of its features were not as exaggerated, therefore it made a calming, less imposing impression on people. Nevertheless, these two dinosaurs were a gigantic hit, and everyone was glad to welcome another carnivore couple to the establishment. The moving of the dinosaurs went swell, and the overall personality of both dinosaurs was very calm. They of course had a drastic change in aggression because of the inhibitors, but what still lingered was a very strict hierarchy when it came to feeding. The alpha would eat first, whereas the other would look on and wait until it was their turn. This behavior was more common with something like a Deinonychus or a raptor, but it was very special to see with this gigantic carnivore like a Mapusaurus. And thus, this final guest was welcomed with open arms. But it would not be the last dinosaur to be added in the park in total. There would still be a few pens where dinosaurs would be added, like the Diplodocus zone. This area was very large and could easily house another species of herbivore or even a carnivore if they weren't too big to prove any danger. And thus, the new addition to this zone would be the Dino Talez. This very unique looking creature was still a big mystery to many scientists and archaeologists out there, so maybe with the recreation of this dinosaur, it could shed some light and provide some answers. First of all, this was one of the larger herbivore species in the park, with its height being close to the spine height of a Diplodocus. But instead of these creatures being really heavy and slow because of that, they were, in reality, pretty fast and nimble because of many hollow bones within their skeletal structure. The placement even created a fin across its spine which explained the bulk around the upper area, but it wasn't portraying outward like with something like a Spinosaurus. In terms of comparison, it shared some similarities to a Hadrosaur, but compared to some of those similar species, these Dino Talez were so much bigger. Their long forearms were very noticeable too, with long, pretty menacing looking claws. Their bills, on the other hand, made them look quite friendly and much more resembling of a bird or a duck. It was also the case that these dinosaurs were omnivores. They would often eat fish, but would also use their claws and long arms to dig up plants. The eating fish aspect was no problem. There was a large body of water within the Diplodocus zone already, and thus some tasty fish would be added that could function as possible food for the new guests in case they felt inclined on eating fish that day. During the initial moving, the helicopter ride was no problem at all, but the new dinosaurs definitely came as a surprise for the Diplodocus, who enjoyed their new home for the past several months. And at first hand, some of the sauropods might have thought that these new additions could be dangerous carnivores. On the other hand, the Dino Talez were also a bit intimidated by the Diplodocus, though it did not take too long for them to realize that they were mostly just friendly slowpokes. The Diplodocus needed a bit more time to get adjusted to these new animals, but in the end, everything went back to its peace and quiet. The guests staying at the nearby hotel had a great view of this whole process, and the fact that the pen was now more bustling with life than ever resulted in more families and couples enjoying a drink, snack, or a glass of wine on the balcony while enjoying the view of these giants. But even then, the Diplodocus zone, which now had turned to a mixed area, could still house another type of dinosaur if they were small enough. And as mentioned before, they could even be carnivorous. Thus, the next addition would be the Coelurus. This critter was really tiny, yet very pretty with its bright color pattern and feisty attitude. A lot was unknown about this dinosaur as well, including the found skeletons were often incomplete or later put into a different category of species. Because the information was so limited, DNA and samples were used from other creatures to complete the code, so this version of the Coelurus could alter a bit of how the dinosaur actually looked, and this alteration went further than the argument that dinosaurs had feathers or not. But the size of these dinosaurs was smaller than, let's say, a Deinonychus or a raptor, and were therefore perfect for adding to the mixed zone with the Diplodocus and Deinocheirus. The other dinosaurs were in no danger, and though these new living guests would be very quick and jittery, they would not be causing too much of a havoc where the other dinosaurs got stressed out. Besides, there would be plenty of meat to be provided to keep the overall mood very calm, and thus the three species would be able to live in harmony with ease. Despite the dinosaurs being so small, they were yet again a big hit because of their beautiful color pattern. The initial wave of Coelurus that was added had a similar pattern of red and green, comparable to that of a Ceratosaurus that was added in earlier. It made them stick out of the thick grass, making them easier to view even if they hit there. These creatures were indeed so small that their addition was barely noticed by the other giants already in the area. Maybe to them they were more like insects. Since the zone was so wide, a total of 15 would be added, and the later additions had a much more varied color scheme, with the most notable being the ones with a bright yellow head and a lightish gray colored body. They were a stark contrast to the ones with the reddish hue, but they looked very pretty and colorful when traveling close in a pack. And then a different pen would await a new guest, and that was the Gallimimus zone. This area was also very large, in order to provide them with the space to run around in, but the Gallimimus were friendly enough to where they could easily invite some of their similar brethren, and thus the Stratiomimus was added to the list. In a way, things had gone full circle. In the first prehistoric zoo a few years ago, the very first dinosaur that was added was this small creature, and it was fitting in a way to have this dinosaur now close up at the finish line by being added to the Gallimimus pen. Their beautiful color variations and more kid-friendly look made them a big hit amongst the younger visitors, and since this symbolized the coming end and official full opening of the park, people were very excited to get a glimpse. Only a handful would be added to the area, and some scientists feared they might be bullied by the larger Gallimimus, but in a way, it was the opposite, in the sense that their small size meant that they had a very feisty attitude. They would often shove away the heads of the drinking or feeding Gallimimus to get some themselves. They were almost comparable to those nasty, small handbag-sized bark dogs that had an attitude like a maniac, despite being so small and able to be bitten in half by something like a German Shepherd. And with that, the final dinosaur had been moved to the zone in the area. The park was done and about to fully open officially, but as said before, the holding area could still be turned into a proper living area, so possibly one more zone would be created, after which of course a proper tour of the finished park was in place.